Ordinance number 2018-20-1G, an ordinance amending the 2018-19 budget by appropriating $458,000 from the general fund balance to the Transit Enterprise Projects Fund for wood stove, pellet stove retrofit emissions control device testing. The sponsors are Mayor Castle and Assembly Members Roberts, Cooper, and Lawrence. It's on page 156. Additional information in your yellow folders. And Mayor Castle, we'll start with you, a staff report from you.
Thank you very much. We'll go back to Mr. Zarnecki and Mr. Miller.
Thank you. So this ordinance appropriates the funding to perform the testing on the parameters that were just approved in the last ordinance. $458,000 is the maximum amount of money that would be required to do all the testing that we talked about last week in the work session. And this would allow a testing facility to complete setup costs and also be able to test a number of pellet stoves, catalytic stoves, and non-catalytic stoves. This, of course, would be put out for a competitive bid process, and if there were manufacturers that wanted to contribute money towards the testing, of course, that would score much higher than a manufacturer that wasn't going to contribute towards the testing. And we do have a breakout of the testing prices if you'd like to see that. I know we did go over that last week. That concludes my staff report.
Okay, thank you. So that takes us to public hearing. So I'm going to open public hearing on 2018-20-1G, and I have first signed up Ms. Olson and Ms. Mullis, who'd like to come forward.
Jeannie Olson, 1890 Hollowell, North Pole, Alaska 99705. I speak with great trepidation about appropriating so much money for testing, but I realize it needs to be done. But I think what you just did will send a huge message to the Swiss manufacturer that someone is really serious, because they just would probably not even consider putting any money towards testing in America unless there was a reason. And you just gave them a reason, so thank you. I would not like to see that much money spent on the testing. It's morphed from in April when air quality came back from the EPA meeting in Nashville. It was $50,000 and we'd have it done by August. But I realize the bureaucracy has grabbed this, and now there's concern about there's only one company, and so now we have to branch out and we have to include catalytic units and all these other things because we have to be fair and we're the government. So that's why it's inflated, and it's going to take a lot of time now. It's not going to be done by, I don't know, maybe winter. It looks like it's stretching out. So that's too bad. Competitive bid, that takes a long time too. And the clock keeps ticking and the air gets worse. So that's all I want to say about it is, you know, I know it's just money, and we could really use that money for buying ESPs. And, you know, the Mammoth marketing money, that could buy ESPs. We just bought a gravel pad up on the North Slope for $7 million. That could buy a lot of ESPs too. We could sell that and buy a lot of ESPs. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Ms. Olson. Let's see if there are questions for you. I don't see any. Thank you. So is Ms. Mullis still around? Ms. Lee, it looks like, has left. Mr. Bartos, you're next on my list. And at that point, anyone else that wishes to speak on this, we have an empty seat.
Hank Bartos, B-A-R-T-O-S, North Pole, quadrangle of death. I want to congratulate you for exercising some control over the air quality by the last ordinance that you passed, you know, and by modifying it, you know, you're sending a powerful message. Now, I would urge you to go a step further. Region 10 EPA and DEC, I think if you pursued them in a collective manner, that they would fund this. Now, I'm a member of an air quality control group, and we met with Senator Stevens here not too awfully long ago, and we were only, not Senator Stevens, Senator Sullivan, I'm sorry, and we were only scheduled for 30 minutes. But an hour and a half later, after we exchanged an awful lot of dialogue, and I think Senator Sullivan saw our points, and then we followed it up with a written document. And he has responded to some of that. He indicated that he knew the Region 10 and the EPA people, and they were going to coordinate. And I think, I can't say for absolute certain, but I think they're going to more than fund this program because it is sorely needed in this borough. And that will work, and it will help, and it's a step in the right direction. And you have exercised a little local control here tonight, and I think that sends a powerful message too. So I urge you to, pursue every avenue with EPA. DEC doesn't have any money, so hopefully we can make this all work.
Thank you, Mr. Bartels. Let's see if there are questions for you. I don't see any. Does anyone else wish to speak on this? I see no one coming forward, so I'm going to close public hearing.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Lawrence and seconded by Manny. I'll give it to,
Great.
pardon, Mr. Gray. Okey doke. Discussion, debate, questions. Mr. Tacky.
I'd like to,
I got you.
it's a lot of money to actually go through with this whole testing program, but given the fact that if we don't meet a certain standard earlier on and we can see that the results aren't there, we won't be spending quite as much. And then if we do have other funding sources, then from like the manufacturers, for instance, or the EPA or DEC are able to put in some funding or to put some help forward, I think it would be a great way to actually save a few dollars. But I think by passing this ordinance and pushing forward with saying, hey, we're willing to put, our own dollars into this, we believe in this enough, that might provide a little more buy-in from those other agencies. So I speak in favor of this ordinance.
Thank you. Mr. Cooper.
Thanks. Mr. Tacky made one of the points I was going to make, which is that, the testing here is tiered. So if pellet stoves don't meet the testing threshold, if that's a device that's not going to work, then we know we can stop there. So to me, it makes a lot of sense to appropriate the full amount now, knowing that if we don't meet the standards, the money's going to lapse back. And I think that we ought to put our money where our mouth is a little bit on this particular issue. So from my perspective, appropriating this full amount makes a lot of sense. I'm also encouraged by the way the Air Quality Division has designed the competitive process for this, where those manufacturers who have devices that they think are going to meet these standards are ranked higher if they're chipping in for the cost of the testing. And hopefully Ms. Olson is right, and that some of these folks who have these devices that want them tested are willing to help get them tested and foot part of the bill. It'll certainly improve their score on the RFP. So, with that in mind, I'm completely comfortable appropriating this full amount now with those caveats. And also, I just think it's worth noting it was convenient or coincidental that we received our updated general fund balance report today. And, I'm comfortable that we have the funds in the general fund to appropriate the money and set it aside to do this testing now. And just in a general sense, this is one area in the community where I do think we need to put some resources right now, and so I support this.
Thank you. I don't have anyone else on my list. Now I do, Mr. Lawrence.
Yeah, I concur with Mr. Cooper and Mr. Tacky that if we want these devices to be approved and utilized, they've got to be tested. And we can't afford just to wait for somebody else to do the testing for us, and hopefully we will get help. But this is expensive, but it's a necessary expense if we're going to really utilize or determine whether we can utilize these devices.
Okay. Any last, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, so the suggestion was made, obviously, that we pursue EPA for some funding here, and we always have, and they've always been generous, and they've given us millions of dollars repeatedly. We're queued up for more grant money, and while there's no guarantee, we're very optimistic on that. And Mr. Brown testified that while these don't currently qualify, there isn't a program for them. If we put our money where our mouth is, as Mr. Cooper said, then they're certainly willing to take a look at it. And my bet is if we prove up the technology, they'd be glad to add it to our stove changeout program and make it acceptable, because they've added things to that program historically as we've moved forward and made funding available through that. So I'm very optimistic, but I agree with Mr. Cooper. We need to put a little bit up front, put our money where our mouth is, and show that these work, and then I think they'll backstop us. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Clerk, I think we're ready to vote.
Mr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mr. Tackey,
Yes.
Mr. Gray,
Yes.
Miss Major,
Yes.
Mr. Quist,
Yes.
Mr. Cooper,
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence,
Yes.
Miss Dodge.
Yes, would anyone like to change their vote? Seeing none?
8-0.
Would an immediate reconsideration be useful to you?
Sure.
I move for immediate reconsideration.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Lawrence and second by Mr. Gray to immediately reconsider this ordinance. We'll remember a no vote means that we don't want to, and a yes vote brings it back before us. Clerks, please call the roll on immediate reconsideration.
Mr. Cooper,
No.
Mr. Quist,
No.
Mr. Tackey,
No.
Mr. Roberts,
No.
Mr. Gray,
No.
Miss Major,
No.
Mr. Lawrence,
No.
Miss Dodge.
No. Would anyone like to change their vote? Seeing none?
0-8.
It's, the immediate reconsideration fails 0-8.